She was dancing alone until the Alpha's Heir whispered, "Pretend you're my fiancée." The grand ballroom of the Valerius Winter Palace glittered with the savage elegance of werewolf royalty, all gathered for the annual all-clan winter solstice ball. Ancient crystal chandeliers refracted candlelight across fur-lined cloaks and ceremonial silver, while liveried servants moved silently between clusters of alphas and their carefully displayed daughters, bearing trays of spiced wine and winter delicacies. The air itself seemed to hum with territorial displays and whispered negotiations that would determine political alliances for the coming year. Lady Anya Vashchenko had positioned herself in what she considered the safest spot in the entire ballroom, a shadowed alcove near the musician's dais, partially obscured by an elaborate arrangement of winter roses and holly. From here she could observe the political theater, without being drawn into humiliating conversations about which Alpha's son had recently come of age, or which Eastern clan family had finally accepted their bankruptcy and begun selling off ancestral lands. At 22, Anya had perfected the art of social invisibility. Not that she was unattractive, quite the contrary. Her striking features, the high cheekbones of the Eastern bloodlines, those unusual amber eyes that seemed to catch and hold firelight, the fall of dark golden hair that framed a face both delicate and defiant, had caused quite a stir during her presentation 3 seasons ago. But after her father's disastrous alliance with the failed Southern Clan rebellion, after the whispered accusations of treason that were never quite proven, but never quite dismissed, suitable matches had vanished like smoke. Pride prevented her from accepting the degrading offers from minor alphas who viewed her solely as exotic damaged goods to be acquired cheaply. Practicality had kept her from pursuing romantic fantasies when her family needed every copper for more pressing matters, like ensuring her younger sister Mira didn't suffer the same social death that had claimed Anya's prospects. She touched the simple pendant at her throat, her mother's, one of the few pieces they hadn't yet sold, and allowed herself a small smile of grim satisfaction. This was perfectly tolerable, observing the mating dance from a safe distance, fulfilling her required appearance to maintain what little social standing remained, and avoiding the pitying glances that inevitably came when unmated females of diminished families attended these gatherings. That one, a voice declared from somewhere behind the rose arrangement, male, commanding, edged with a particular authority that came from generations of unquestioned alpha dominance. Anya froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. "Your Highness," came another voice, deeper, cautious. Lord Castellan Bram, if Anya wasn't mistaken, one of the Western King's senior advisors. That young woman by the musicians. Who is she? Anya's heart began to pound as she realized with creeping horror that they were discussing her. She considered stepping forward to announce her presence, but something in the tone of the first voice, calculating, decisive, utterly confident, kept her perfectly still. "That is Lady Anya Vashchenko, Your Highness, Lord Dmitry Vashchenko's eldest daughter, an old bloodline from the Eastern Territories, though I understand the family has fallen on difficult circumstances in recent years." Difficult circumstances. The commanding voice, definitely belonging to someone of significant rank, Anya noted with growing alarm, sounded intrigued rather than dismissive. "Explain." "Political troubles, I'm afraid. Nothing criminal. Mind you, though there were questions about Lord Vashchenko's judgment during the Southern Uprising. The family lost most of their holdings in the aftermath. Lady Anya has been presented for 3 seasons, though she never took. Too proud, some say. Too damaged by association, others claim. Personally, I believe she simply never found anyone willing to overlook her father's mistakes. Or perhaps no one worthy recognized what such a situation offers. The first voice said with an edge of dark satisfaction. "Tell me, is she desperate?" Anya nearly crushed the delicate stem of her wine glass. The absolute audacity. Desperate? I wouldn't say desperate, Your Highness, but she must be aware that her prospects diminish with each passing moon. She has a younger sister to consider. At her age and with her circumstances, she cannot afford to be particular about offers, should any come. Perfect. The voice declared with the finality of a blade falling. Absolutely perfect. Before Anya could process this alarming pronouncement, A man swept around a rose arrangement with the lethal grace of a predator who had never known defeat. He was perhaps 27 years of age, dressed in the formal black and silver that marked Western clan royalty, the fabric cut to emphasize shoulders that spoke of both violence and control. His dark hair was pulled back in the traditional alpha style, revealing a face that was all sharp angles and ruthless intelligence. Most notably, he wore the ceremonial torque of the heir apparent, 3 bands of silver that caught the candlelight, and an expression of absolute determination. But it was his eyes that stopped Anya's breath. Winter gray and utterly focused, the eyes of someone accustomed to having every command obeyed without question. Prince Chiron Valerius, heir to the Western Alpha King, settled his full attention on her with the devastating precision of a wolf selecting prey. Lady Anya Vashchenko, he announced, extending his hand with the authority of someone who had never been refused anything in his life. Dance with me? It wasn't a request. Before we begin, like and subscribe if you're ready to watch a fake engagement become devastatingly real. Comment below, would you say yes? And tell me where in the world you are watching from. Chapter 1, The First Deception. Anya's fingers trembled against Prince Chiron's palm as he led her through the whispering crowd with the inexorable force of a river current. She was acutely aware of every eye tracking their progress. The Eastern clan matrons leaning together with raised eyebrows, the Western courtiers parting like water, the younger unmated females whose expressions ranged from envy to frank disbelief. He didn't lead her to the dance floor. Instead, Chiron guided her with quiet ruthlessness toward a pair of glass doors she hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind cascading winter vines. The balcony beyond was mercifully empty, lit only by moonlight and the distant glow from the ballroom. The moment the doors closed behind them, muting the music to a whisper, he released her hand and turned with predatory precision. I need you to listen very carefully, Lady Vashchenko, because I will not repeat myself, and we are perhaps 3 minutes before tongues start wagging about impropriety. His voice was low, controlled, but she heard the edge beneath it, something sharp and dangerous. In approximately 1 hour, Alpha King Lycaos of the Northern clans is going to publicly announce a marriage contract between his daughter and myself. A contract I never agreed to, negotiated by ambitious sycophants who believed my father too ill to notice their maneuvering. Anya's breath caught. Political marriages arranged without the Alpha King's direct consent were grounds for challenge. Or war. That's treasonous? Yes. Chiron's jaw tightened. It's also carefully constructed to appear legitimate enough that refusing will make me look like a faithless fool who toys with a young woman's honor. Lycaos wants a foothold in Western territory. My public humiliation is simply a pleasant bonus for him. She forced herself to meet those winter-gray eyes despite every instinct screaming to look away from such concentrated authority. And what exactly does this have to do with me, Your Highness? You are going to become my fiancée. Tonight, publicly, before Lycaos could make his announcement. The words hung in the frozen air between them like a blade. Anya heard herself laugh, a short, sharp sound that held no humor whatsoever. You're insane. I'm the daughter of a disgraced Eastern lord whose name is practically synonymous with poor judgment. Announcing an engagement to me would be political suicide. On the contrary, Chiron stepped closer, and she became suddenly, viscerally aware how large he was, how the breadth of his shoulders blocked the moonlight. You are perfect precisely because you are unexpected. Lycaos has been monitoring every eligible highborn female in the Western territories for months. He knows which families owe us debts, which daughters have been positioned for advantage. But you, something that might have been admiration flickered across his features. You're a complete blind spot, an Eastern lady of impeccable bloodline, but zero political leverage. A romantic choice rather than a calculated one. There is nothing romantic about this, Anya said flatly, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. No, he agreed, there isn't, which is why I'm prepared to compensate you handsomely for 3 months of your time, long enough to weather the immediate crisis and force Lycaos to redirect his ambitions elsewhere. Compensate me. She tasted the words like poison. You mean pay me to lie to your father, your court, and every alpha in that ballroom. I mean, Chiron said with brutal precision, Offer your sister a marriage contract with Lord Andreas Severin's second son, a respectable match that will restore your family's standing and provide her with security for life, plus a land grant modest but profitable. Return to your father's name. Anya's world tilted violently. Lord Severin was Western nobility of the highest order, his family wealthy and scandal-free. A match with his son would be beyond anything Mira hoped for, would erase years of whispered shame and financial desperation. It was impossible. It was everything. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me, truly?" For the first time, Chiron's expression shifted into something rawer. "Because you were standing alone in a room full of peacocks and predators, watching everything with the eyes of someone who understands exactly how vicious this world is. Because when I said your name, you didn't simper or blush. You looked at me like you were calculating whether I was worth the risk." He paused. "Because I suspect you're one of the few people in that ballroom who might actually keep her head when everything goes to hell." The honesty of it struck her like a physical blow. This wasn't seduction or manipulation. This was one desperate creature recognizing another. 3 months, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And the contract was signed before I set foot in Valeria's keep. Agreed. If this fails, if we're exposed, you'll ensure my sister's match proceeds regardless." Something like respect flickered in those winter eyes. "You have my word as heir to the Western throne." Anya extended her hand, palm up, in the traditional gesture of tentative pack alliance. "Then I accept, Your Highness." Chiron's fingers closed around hers, warm and absolutely certain. "Call me Chiron. Fiancés don't stand on formality." He drew her hand to his lips in a gesture that would have seemed courtly if not for the intensity burning in his gaze. "Are you ready?" "No," she admitted. "But I suspect that doesn't matter." His smile was a wolf's promise, all danger and dark amusement. Not even slightly. They walked back into the ballroom together, and Chiron didn't release her hand. The music faltered as heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Anya felt the weight of hundreds of eyes like physical pressure against her skin. Prince Chiron Valerius raised his voice, pitched to carry across the sudden, suffocating silence. "Lords and ladies of the assembled clans, it is my profound honor to announce my engagement to Lady Anya Vashchenko of the Eastern Territories. We will wed at the spring equinox." The ballroom exploded into chaos. Chapter 2. The Alpha King Scrutiny. The carriage journey to Valeria's keep took 6 hours through winter forests that grew progressively darker and more ancient. Anya sat across from Chiron in silence, broken only by the creak of wheels and the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats. He spent most of the journey reviewing documents with the focused intensity of someone who couldn't afford distraction, though she caught him watching her twice with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. She left before dawn, with nothing but a hastily packed trunk and a brief, tearful embrace with Mira, who'd been too shocked by the previous night's announcement to ask the questions Anya couldn't have answered honestly anyway. The marriage contracts, signed, sealed, and witnessed, were locked in her traveling case like a talisman against disaster. When Valeria's keep finally came into view, Anya understood why the Western clans had never been successfully conquered. The fortress rose from living rock like something carved by ancient gods rather than mortal hands, all severe angles and weathered stone that had withstood centuries of siege and storm. Massive walls enclosed courtyards she could only glimpse, and towers pierced the gray sky with unmistakable threat. This wasn't a palace designed for comfort or beauty. This was a monument to power that made no apologies for its brutality. Impressive, isn't it? Chiron's voice held dark amusement. "My ancestors believed in making statements. Your ancestors believed in making everyone else wet themselves in terror." Anya corrected before she could stop herself. His laugh was genuine and unexpected, startling her more than his earlier intensity had. "You'll fit in better than you think." The carriage rolled through gates that required a dozen guard to open, past training yards where warriors stopped mid-drill to stare, and finally halted before steps that seemed designed to make visitors feel appropriately insignificant. Chiron descended first, then offered his hand with the casual assumption that she'd accept it. She did, hating how natural the gesture already felt. "My father will want to see you immediately," he said quietly as they climbed. "He's not well. His wolf has been restless since the fever last winter. But but his mind is sharp as ever, probably sharper than mine on my best day. Comforting, Anya muttered, I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to warn you that he will look for every crack in this story, every hesitation, every inconsistency. If you break, I won't break. She lifted her chin. I agreed to 3 months, Your Highness. I intend to deliver 3 months. The throne room, because there was no other word for the vast, severe chamber they entered, was heated by fireplaces large enough to roast entire deer. Pelts covered the stone floors, and weapons lined the walls in careful display. Not decoration, but arsenal. At the far end, seated in a chair that somehow managed to look like a throne despite being plain cardwood, sat Alpha King Theron Valerius. He was perhaps 60, wrapped in furs that emphasized rather than concealed the breadth of shoulders that had clearly passed of his son. Silver threaded through dark hair, and illness had carved his features into something hawk-sharp and merciless. But it was his eyes, the same winter gray as Chiron's, that pinned Anya in place with the weight of absolute authority. So, Theron said, his voice carrying despite its quietness, this is the Eastern girl who managed to catch my son's attention in a single evening. Anya sank into the formal curtsy her mother had drilled into her years ago, grateful her trembling knees didn't betray her. Your Majesty, I am honored. Don't. The single word cracked like a whip. Don't waste my time with platitudes. Girl, come here. She walked forward on legs that felt carved from ice, acutely aware of Chiron's tension radiating beside her. Theron studied her with the methodical attention of someone examining a horse for purchase, assessing bloodline, looking for flaws, calculating value. Your father is Dmitry Vashchenko, the fool who backed the Southern Uprising. It wasn't a question, but Anya answered anyway. Yes, Your Majesty. And you expect me to believe that my son, my heir, who has rejected every suitable match presented to him for 5 years, suddenly developed a passionate attachment to the daughter of a man who committed borderline treason? Father, Chiron began, but Theron silenced him with a raised hand. I'm speaking to your fiancée, boy. Let her answer. Anya met those merciless eyes and chose truth, or at least a version of it. I don't expect you to believe anything, Your Majesty. I can only tell you that your son saw something in me worth claiming, and I saw in him a man worth the considerable risk of accepting. Whether that satisfies your doubts is entirely your decision. The silence stretched like wire pulled taut. Then, impossibly, Theron's mouth quirked into something that might have been approval. She has spine, at least. He shifted his attention to Chiron. This wasn't about politics, then, about forestalling like Kills' gambit. This was about choosing my own path, Chiron said steadily, and Anya heard the truth buried in the lie. He was choosing his path, just not in the way his father assumed. Anya is mine. That's all that matters. Theron drummed fingers against the arm of his chair, the sound unnervingly rhythmic. 3 conditions. First, the wedding proceeds at spring equinox as announced. No delays that might suggest uncertainty. Second, she undergoes full instruction in Western court protocols and traditions. I won't have her embarrassing this family through ignorance. Agreed, Chiron said before Anya could respond. Third, Theron's smile was absolutely wolfish. You will share private quarters immediately. If this bond is genuine, you'll have no objection to the intimacy expected of mated pairs. If it's performance, well, you better both be exceptional actors. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Anya's feet. Shared quarters. Shared bed. The implications crashed through her carefully constructed calm, like stones through ice. Chiron's hand found hers, his grip tight enough to hurt. As you wish, father. Theron waved him away with casual dismissal. Go. I'm sure you have much to discuss. They retreated with as much dignity as possible, but Anya felt those winter-gray eyes tracking them until the doors finally, mercifully closed. Chapter 3. The Mating Pact. Chiron's chambers occupied the entire western tower, a series of interconnected rooms that managed to be both severely masculine and unexpectedly luxurious. Dark wood paneling absorbed the firelight. Thick carpets muffled sound, and the furniture was built on a scale that accommodated his considerable frame. The bedroom itself was dominated by a bed large enough to sleep for, draped in furs that probably cost more than her family's remaining estate. Anya stood frozen just inside the doorway, while Chiron dismissed the servants who delivered her trunk. The moment the door closed, leaving them alone, the careful neutrality he'd maintained since leaving the throne room cracked. I didn't anticipate that. He dragged a hand through his hair, destroying its formal arrangement. My father has never. Sharing quarters wasn't part of the plan. No, Anya agreed, her voice sharper than she'd intended. The plan was 3 months of public appearances and political theater. Not sleeping in the same room as a man I met yesterday. I'm aware. Chiron crossed to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid without asking if she wanted one. He pressed a glass into her hand with more force than necessary. Drink. We need to establish rules before the situation becomes more impossible than it already is. The whiskey burned down her throat, steadying her jangling nerves marginally. Rules. How civilized. Would you prefer chaos? He took a long swallow from his own glass. Because I can arrange that, too. Despite everything, Anya felt her mouth twitch toward an unwilling smile. Rules, then. You first, Your Highness. Chiron. His correction was automatic. We're supposed to be intimately acquainted, remember? Use my name, especially in private. It needs to sound natural. Fine. Chiron. She made it sound like a challenge. What else? He began pacing. A cage predator working through problems with movement. Public appearances. You stay within arm's reach unless I specifically tell you otherwise. My father will have people watching, and engaged couples don't stand on opposite sides of rooms. Agreed, but I won't be treated like ornamental property. If someone speaks to me, I respond. I won't play the simpering, silent decoration. Something flashed in his eyes, approval or irritation. She couldn't tell. I wouldn't ask you to. Your intelligence is part of what makes this believable. He paused. Meals are taken in the great hall unless I'm working through dinner, in which case we eat here. You'll attend the morning court sessions. My father will expect it, and you'll need instruction in Western protocols from Lady Celeste. She's ruthless but fair. What about my movements? Am I a prisoner in this tower? Don't be dramatic. But his jaw tightened. The keep is yours to explore during daylight hours. The library, the gardens, the training yards if you're foolish enough to want warrior wolves staring at you. Just take an escort. There are factions here who'd love to use you against me. The casual mention of danger sent ice down her spine. How reassuring. You wanted honesty. Chiron refilled his glass. Here's more. Letters to your family go through me first. Not because I don't trust you, but because I don't trust who might intercept them. Anything about our arrangement stays between us. If you need to communicate something to your sister, tell me and I'll ensure it reaches her safely. Anya set her glass down with deliberate care. And the sleeping arrangements? Since that's the massive elephant currently occupying your excessively large bed. For the first time since entering the chambers, Chiron looked genuinely uncomfortable. I'll take the couch in the study. It's adequate. For a week, perhaps. Your father said immediately, which suggests this isn't a temporary imposition. She forced herself to approach the problem logically, as if discussing sleeping arrangements with a dangerously attractive prince was perfectly normal. The bed is large enough that we could establish a clear division. You on one side, me on the other, and a line of metaphorical fire down the middle. You'd be comfortable with that? His voice had gone carefully neutral. I'd be comfortable with you in a separate building, Anya said bluntly. But since that's not an option, and I refuse to be the reason you develop a permanent spine injury from that couch, we adapt, like rational adults. Rational adults, Chiron repeated, something dangerously close to amusement flickering across his features. Is that what we are? We're two people trapped in an impossible situation, trying not to make it worse. She met his gaze squarely. So, yes, rational, adults, with very clear boundaries about what does and does not happen in that bed. Agreed. He moved closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. For the record, Lady Vashchenko, I have no intention of taking advantage of the situation. Whatever else I am, I'm not that kind of bastard. The sincerity in his voice surprised her. Anya, she said quietly, if I'm using your name, you use mine. Especially here, where no one performing. Anya, he said it slowly, as if testing the shape of it. There's one more thing you should know. About why I was so desperate to avoid Lycaos' arrangement. She waited, watching emotions flicker across his face too quickly to identify. His daughter is 15 years old. Chiron's voice had gone flat, empty of everything except barely controlled rage. A child who's terrified of him and has no say in being used as a political pawn. The marriage contract specified immediate consummation to ensure legitimacy of any potential heir. He turned away, shoulders rigid. I would have been legally bound to. Stop. Anya's hand found his arm before she could think better of it. You don't have to say it. I couldn't. The words came out raw. I would have started a war before I touched that girl. But the political cost, the families who'd suffer in the fighting, the alliances that would shatter. He broke off, jaw working. Understanding crashed through her like a wave. This wasn't just political maneuvering. This was a decent man trapped between impossible choices, trying to find a path that didn't require destroying his honor or his people. So you found a third option, Anya said softly. You found me. Chiron turned back to her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. I found you dancing alone in a ballroom, looking like you understood exactly what it meant to be caught between loyalty and survival. And I gambled everything on the hope that you'd be brave enough to help me. Or desperate enough, she whispered. Does it matter which? His hand covered hers where it still rested on his arm, warm and solid and surprisingly gentle. You're here. You said yes. Whatever your reasons, you gave me a way out that didn't require becoming the monster Lycaos wanted me to be. The gratitude in his voice undid something in her carefully constructed defenses. This wasn't the commanding prince from the ballroom or the calculating strategist from the carriage. This was just a man, exhausted and relieved and trying desperately to do right by people who depended on him. 3 months, Anya said, but the words had lost their edge. We survived 3 months, and everyone gets what they need. 3 months, Chiron agreed. His thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture that might have been unconscious, starting with figuring out how two virtual strangers share a bed without losing their minds. Despite everything, Anya laughed. A real sound started out of her. Well, at least life won't be boring. His answering smile transformed his entire face, making him look younger and infinitely more dangerous to her peace of mind. No, I can promise you that. Chapter 4. The Threat Rises. The formal banquet hall of Illyria's Keep had been built to accommodate hundreds, and tonight it seemed determined to prove its capacity. Anya sat at Chiron's right hand at the high table, acutely aware of every eye that tracked her movements as she navigated a bewildering array of silverware and an even more bewildering array of political landmines disguised as polite conversation. 3 days of intensive instruction from the formidable Lady Celeste had prepared her for the mechanics of Western court etiquette. Nothing had prepared her for the suffocating reality of being on display, while trying to eat pheasant without trembling hands betraying her nerves. Chiron's thigh pressed against hers beneath the table. A deliberate touch, she'd learned, his way of communicating reassurance in a room where they were never truly alone. She'd grown accustomed to these small contacts over the past 72 hours. His hand at the small of her back during morning court, his fingers tangling briefly with hers during walks through the garden. The shocking intimacy of waking to find him already awake on the side of their carefully divided bed, watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. The boundaries were holding. Mostly, if she ignored the way her pulse jumped every time he touched her, or the dangerous warmth that bloomed in her chest when he smiled at something she said. "You're doing well," Chiron murmured, leaning close enough that his breath stirred the hair at her temple. To observers, it would look like intimate conversation between lovers. The truth was far more practical. Lord Garrett is 3 seats down. Trying to catch your eye? He's harmless but tedious. Acknowledge him briefly. Then redirect to Lady Marin beside him. She's an ally. Anya followed his instructions, offering Lord Garrett polite nod before engaging Lady Marin in conversation about the winter roses blooming in the keep's conservatory. The older woman's eyes warmed with approval, and Anya felt a small flutter of victory. She was learning this deadly game, step by careful step. The main doors opened with enough force to silence conversations mid-sentence. The man who entered moved with the particular arrogance of someone accustomed to inspiring fear. He was perhaps 50, built like a war monument, with silver-shot black hair and eyes the color of old ice. He wore the ceremonial furs of the northern clans, and every instinct Anya possessed screamed predator. Chiron's hand found her knee under the table, gripping hard enough to communicate urgent warning. "Alpha King Lycaos," he said quietly. "Right on schedule." Her heart stuttered. This was the man whose marriage trap Chiron had evaded, the threat that had started this entire charade. Anya forced herself to remain perfectly still as Lycaos approached the high table with two companions. A thin, sharp-featured man who had spy written in every calculating glance, and a pale girl who couldn't be more than 16, her eyes downcast and her hands trembling. His daughter, the child Chiron had refused to destroy. Prince Chiron. Lycaos' voice carried across the hall with practiced projection. "How fortunate to find you celebrating. I was devastated to hear your sudden engagement, announced so precipitously that the formal alliances we've been negotiating became quite impossible to honor." The threat beneath the courtesy was sharp enough to draw blood. Chiron rose, and Anya stood with him, grateful for the hours of instruction that made the movement automatic. "Alpha King Lycaos, your presence honors us, though I'm surprised you traveled so far without sending formal notice of your arrival. I was visiting the neighboring territories and couldn't resist offering my personal congratulations." Lycaos' smile was all teeth, and satisfied my considerable curiosity about the lady who captured the Western heir's notoriously reluctant heart. His gaze fixed on Anya with the weight of absolute scrutiny, and she understood with perfect clarity that this man would destroy her without hesitation if he found cracks in their deception. "Lady Anya Vashchenko," Chiron said, his hand moving to her waist in a possessive gesture that looked entirely natural. "My betrothed, Anya, this is Alpha King Lycaos of the northern clans." She executed the formal curtsy Lady Celeste had drilled into her. "Your Majesty, you honor us with your presence." "Charming." Lycaos circled them slowly, and Anya felt like prey being assessed. "Tell me, Lady Anya, how did you and Prince Chiron meet?" The announcement was so sudden that rumors vary wildly. Some say it was a childhood acquaintance rekindled. Others suggest a passionate encounter at the solstice ball itself. The trap was elegantly laid. Any hesitation, any inconsistency between her answer and Chiron's would expose them. "The ball," Anya said, letting truth bleed into fiction. Though calling it a meeting seems insufficient, it felt more like recognition. Recognition? Lycaos' eyebrow lifted. "How poetic. And you, Prince Chiron? Was it similarly earth-shattering for you?" "I saw her dancing alone," Chiron said, his voice carrying the low intensity that made every word feel like truth. "And I knew I'd spend the rest of my life regretting it if I didn't cross that ballroom and claim her before someone else did." The rawness in his tone sent heat flooding through Anya's veins. He was good at this. Too good. Or perhaps it wasn't entirely performance. "How romantic," the sharp-featured spy murmured. "And yet, Lady Anya, I'm told your family rarely attends Western functions. What brought you to the solstice ball?" Another trap. If she admitted she'd been seeking advantageous matches for her sister, it would suggest mercenary motives. If she claimed romantic interest in Chiron specifically, it would seem like calculated pursuit. "Hope," Anya said simply. "Foolish, perhaps, but I've always believed that fortune favors those brave enough to show up." Lycaos laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "And fortune certainly favored you, didn't it? From social obscurity to princess consort in a single evening." "Careful." Chiron's voice had gone dangerously soft. "You're speaking to my future mate." "Of course." Lycaos spread his hands in mock apology. "Forgive an old wolf skepticism. It's simply that engagement announced so hastily often lacked depth. The passion fades when scrutinized in daylight. Then, perhaps," Anya said, surprised at herself with her boldness. "You should observe us more closely. See if the passion withstands your scrutiny." She turned to Chiron, pulse hammering, and prayed he understood what she was offering. His eyes widened fractionally, surprise, then comprehension, then something darker and infinitely more dangerous. His hand rose to cup her face with devastating gentleness. "Anya," he murmured, just loud enough for their audience. "Are you sure?" She answered by closing the distance between them. The kiss started as performance, a public display meant to silence doubts and sell their deception. But the moment Chiron's lips met hers, something shifted. His other hand slid into her hair, angling her head with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how to kiss a woman senseless. Anya's fingers clutched at his jacket, steadying herself against the onslaught of sensation. The taste of wine on his tongue, the heat of his body against hers, the shocking intimacy of being claimed in front of hundreds of witnesses. When they finally broke apart, she was trembling and his breathing had gone ragged. The hall erupted in applause and wolf calls, shattering the moment. Lycaos' expression had smoothed into careful neutrality, but Anya saw the frustration flickering in those ice-pale eyes. Well, that was certainly convincing. Was there doubt? Chiron's arm remained around her waist, anchoring her against his side. "My mate, and I have nothing to hide." Clearly. Lycaos inclined his head with grudging respect. "I won't intrude further on your celebration. Enjoy your evening, Prince Chiron." Lady Anya. His gaze lingered on her for one more calculating moment. "I suspect we'll be seeing much more of each other." He departed with his entourage, leaving a wake of whispered speculation. Anya couldn't make herself move away from Chiron's warmth, couldn't stop tasting him on her lips or feeling the ghost impression of his hands on her skin. When she finally dared look up at him, she found him staring down at her with an expression that stole what remained of her breath. "That was," he started. "Necessary," she finished quickly. "Entirely necessary for deception." "Right, the deception." But his thumb traced her jaw with unmistakable longing. "We should sit, before I do something monumentally stupid." They returned to their seats, but the careful distance they'd maintained for 3 days had evaporated like morning mist. His hand found hers beneath the table, fingers interlacing with the easy intimacy of longtime lovers. And Anya realized with dawning alarm that the most dangerous threat wasn't Lycaos' suspicion. It was how desperately she wanted this fiction to become real. If you're invested in Anya and Chiron's dangerous game of deception, and the very real feelings threatening to destroy their carefully constructed lies, subscribe to follow their journey. Each chapter pulls them deeper into a web where the difference between pretense and passion becomes impossible to distinguish. Don't miss what happens when the next threat forces them even closer, or when the walls between duty and desire finally crumble completely. Chapter 5. The Discovery of Honor. Anya had discovered that the Keep's library was her sanctuary. 3 stories of books housed in a tower room with windows overlooking the eastern forests. Lady Celeste had given her leave to explore it freely, and she'd spent the past hour lost in the history of the clan wars, grateful for the temporary escape from the suffocating awareness that had plagued her since the banquet, since the kiss that had felt nothing like performance, and everything like promise. She was so absorbed in her reading that she didn't hear the commotion in the courtyard below until raised voices penetrated her concentration. Setting the book aside, Anya moved a window and looked down into the training yard. Chiron stood in the center of a gathering crowd, still dressed in his formal court attire, facing a young warrior who couldn't be more than 19. The boy's face was twisted with anguish, and even from this distance, Anya could see he was trembling. "Can't pay it, Your Highness," the young man was saying, his voice cracking. "My father's medical care took everything. But Lord Garrett says if I don't settle the training bond debt by tomorrow, he'll have me stripped of rank and exiled from the keep." Anya's chest tightened. Training bonds were sacred contracts. Young wolves from poor families could petition wealthy lords to sponsor their warrior education in exchange for years of service. Breaking one meant disgrace and permanent exile. "And you came to me because—" Chiron's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "Because Lord Garrett is your father's advisor, and you're the only one who might convince him to grant an extension. I know I have no right to ask, but The boy's voice broke entirely. My mother has no one else. If I'm exiled, she'll starve. The crowd had gone silent, watching their prince with the focused attention of people who understood they were witnessing something significant. Anya found herself holding her breath. Chiron studied the young warrior for a long moment. Then, with deliberate precision, he began removing his formal jacket. "What's your name?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves. "Mikhail, your highness." "Well, Mikhail, here's what's going to happen." Chiron's voice carried across the suddenly silent courtyard. "You're going to spar with me. If you last 5 minutes, I'll pay your debt myself and negotiate a new contract that gives you time to care for your mother." Stunned silence. Then Mikhail's face transformed with desperate hope. "Your highness, I couldn't possibly. You asked for my help. I'm offering on my terms." Chiron moved to the weapons rack, selected 2 practice swords, and tossed one to the young warrior. "Unless you prefer to take your chances with Lord Garrett's mercy?" "No." Mikhail caught the blade clumsily, clearly terrified and confused in equal measure. "I'll fight." What followed was brutal and beautiful. Chiron didn't condescend to hold back, and the young warrior fought with the desperation of someone with everything to lose. But Anya watched the prince orchestrate the bout with surgical precision, pushing Mikhail hard enough to make it legitimate, but leaving openings that allowed the boy to land strikes, to prove his training hadn't been wasted. When exactly 5 minutes had elapsed, Chiron stepped back and lowered his blade. "You've got decent instincts and your footwork needs refinement, but you fought with honor." He turned to face the assembled warriors. "Mikhail's debt is settled. He'll serve directly under my command for the next 3 years, with wages sufficient to support his mother and continue his education." The courtyard erupted in approval, wolves howling, fists pounding shields in a traditional show of respect. Mikhail dropped to one knee, overcome. "Your Highness, I don't know how to—" "Sir, well, that's payment enough." Chiron gripped the boy's shoulder, hauling him to his feet. "Report to Commander Voss tomorrow morning. He'll get you sorted." As the crowd dispersed, Chiron's gaze lifted to the library window where Anya stood frozen. Even across the distance, she felt the impact of those winter-gray eyes meeting hers. He didn't smile or acknowledge her beyond that single, searing look. Then he collected his jacket and disappeared into the keep. Anya sank into the window seat, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. This was the man she'd agreed to deceive. The ruthless political strategist who'd cornered her at a ball and demanded she pretend to love him. Except he'd just paid a stranger's debt without hesitation, had given a desperate young warrior dignity instead of charity, and had done it all without making a performance of his generosity. She thought she understood him. Ambitious, calculating, willing to use whatever tools necessary to achieve his goals. But that man in the courtyard had been something else entirely. Someone who understood that true power meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Someone who made her chest ache with feelings far more dangerous than physical attraction. The library door opened without warning. Chiron entered, still slightly disheveled from the sparring, carrying a leather document case. "You saw," he said. "Not a question." "I saw." Anya couldn't quite meet his eyes. "That was kind. That was practical." Mikhail's a talented fighter who would have been wasted in exile because Garrett's too rigid to understand that loyalty is earned, not purchased. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of exertion and cold air clinging to him. "Don't mistake strategic investment for kindness, Anya. Don't mistake my intelligence for gullibility, Chiron." She finally looked up at him. "You could have just paid the debt, the sparring, the public declaration, giving him a position in your personal guard. That was about showing every warrior in that yard that you value honor and skill over arbitrary contracts." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she'd read the situation so clearly. "And here, I thought you believed I was just a manipulative bastard using you for political convenience." "I'm beginning to suspect," Anya said quietly, "that you're significantly more complicated than that." The air between them thickened with unspoken things. Chiron's hand lifted, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that felt achingly intimate. "I brought you something." He offered her the document case, his expression carefully neutral. The first installment. Lord Severin's formal acceptance of the marriage contract for your sister and the deed transfer for the land grant. Anya's hands shook as she opened the case. There, in official seals and elegant script, was everything she'd agreed to the charade secure. Myra's future guaranteed. Her family's honor, beginning its restoration. The price of 3 months of deception. Except it didn't feel like deception anymore. It felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down at a fall that would either destroy her or transform her into something she couldn't yet imagine. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the documents like a lifeline. "Don't." Chiron's voice had gone rough. "Don't thank me for keeping my word. It's the bare minimum of honor." She looked up at him. This complicated, infuriating man who fought for strangers and paid his debts and kissed her like she was air itself, and felt her carefully constructed defenses crumble into dust. "Chiron," she said, his name a question and a confession all at once. He stepped back as if she'd burned him. "I should go. Council meeting in an hour." He was gone before she could find words for the truth rising in her throat like floodwater. That the lie was working perfectly, that everyone believed their performance, that the cost of her heart was becoming catastrophically, irrevocably real. Chapter 6. The Unscripted Kiss. The private audience chamber was smaller than the throne room, but no less intimidating. All dark wood and ancestral portraits, whose painted eyes seemed to track movement with unnerving intensity. Anya sat beside Chiron on a settee that forced him into proximity that still made her pulse stutter, facing Lord Chancellor Davos, a silver-haired political veteran whose shrewd gaze missed nothing. "I'm merely ensuring," Davos was saying in the tone of someone asking perfectly reasonable questions, "that the future princess consort understands the responsibilities she'll be assuming. The Western clans have particular traditions regarding the Luna's role in succession matters." Chiron's hand rested on her knee beneath the table. Steady, warm, communicating patience. They'd been navigating this interrogation for 20 minutes, and Anya's nerves were stretched wire-thin. "Lady Anya is a quick study," Chiron said smoothly. "She's already impressed my father with her grasp of court protocols." "Indeed, Lady Celeste speaks highly of her aptitude." Davos smiled, but his eyes remained calculating. "Tell me, Lady Anya, how did Prince Chiron's time in the Northern Territories influence his views on interclan alliances? I imagine you've discussed his experiences there extensively." Anya's mind went utterly blank. Northern Territories. She knew nothing about Chiron spending time in the North. Was it diplomatic service? Military campaign? Educational exchange? Any answer she gave could be catastrophically wrong, and Davos was watching her with the focused attention of a hunter who just spotted his prey hesitate. She began, scrambling for safe ground. "We discussed many things, but I wouldn't want to misrepresent." "It was a difficult period," Chiron interjected, but Anya heard the tension beneath his casual tone. Davos had caught the hesitation, the fraction of a second that revealed ignorance where intimate knowledge should exist. "Difficult indeed," Davos agreed, leaning forward slightly. 3 months embedded with their war council must have shaped your perspective considerably, Your Highness. I'm surprised you haven't shared those insights with your betrothed, given how relevant they are to current political dynamics." The trap was fully sprung. An engaged couple, supposedly deeply connected, should discuss something so significant. Anya's failure to know this basic fact about Chiron's past screamed deception to anyone paying attention, and Davos was very much paying attention. "Actually," Chiron said, his voice dropping into a lower register that sent heat sliding down Anya's spine, "we've been somewhat distracted by other matters." Before she could process the shift in his tone, his hand slid from her knee to her waist, turning her to face him. His eyes blazed with an intensity that stole her breath. Part warning, part something far more dangerous. "Forgive me," he murmured, loud enough for Davos to hear. "I can't seem to help myself around you." Then his mouth claimed hers with none of the careful control from the banquet kiss. This was raw and demanding, his hand fisting in her hair to angle her head exactly where he wanted it. Anya gasped against his lips, and he took immediate advantage, deepening the kiss until thought became impossible. Her fingers clutched at his shoulders, seeking purchase in a world that had tilted violently sideways. He tasted like the whiskey they'd been served and something darker, more addictive. His other hand splayed across her lower back, pulling her closer until she was practically in his lap, until every point of contact between them burned. Somewhere in the distant reality beyond consuming heat of his mouth, she heard Davos clear his throat, Chiron gentle to kiss by degrees, a softening rather than a retreat, before finally breaking contact. His forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing hard. "Apologies, Lord Chancellor," Chiron said without looking away from Anya's face. "As I said, distracted. So I see." Davos's voice held unmistakable amusement now. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time, when you're both less occupied." "Appreciated," Chiron managed. Anya heard the Lord Chancellor's footsteps retreating, the door opening and closing, but she couldn't seem to make herself move. Chiron's hand still cradled her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw with devastating tenderness. "He's gone," she whispered. "I know." But Chiron didn't release her. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Finally, he pulled back, and the loss of contact felt like a physical ache. That was... Anya started, her voice unsteady. "Necessary." Chiron stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "You were about to expose the gaps in our story. I improvised." "Right, improvised." She pressed shaking fingers to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his mouth on hers. Very convincing improvisation. It needed to be convincing. He dragged a hand through his hair, destroying its careful arrangement. "Davos is reporting directly to my father. Any hint that we're not genuinely attached, and this entire arrangement collapses." Anya stood on trembling legs, something sharp and painful twisting in her chest. "Of course. The arrangement. How foolish of me to forget this is all performance. Anya." "No, you're absolutely right." She smoothed her skirts with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "We need to be more careful. I should have known about your time in the North. I need better preparation for these interrogations." "That's not what I..." Chiron turned back to her, and the heat in his winter-gray eyes made her breath catch. "Damn it! That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" The question came out raw, stripped of the careful neutrality she'd been maintaining for weeks. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, backing her against the settee with the controlled intensity of a predator. "I meant that I needed an excuse to kiss you that didn't involve admitting I've been wanting to do it again since the banquet. That every night sleeping 3 feet away from you is torture. That watching you in that library window yesterday, seeing you understand exactly who I am beneath all the political maneuvering." He broke off, jaw clenched. "Chiron." His name fell from her lips like a plea. "This is a mistake," he said, but his hand rose to cup her face with aching gentleness. "Getting tangled up in real feelings when this has an expiration date. When you deserve better than a man who trapped you into the charade. You gave me a choice," Anya whispered. "I chose this. You chose security for your sister. Not," he gestured between them helplessly, "not whatever this is becoming." She should agree. Should reinforce the boundaries they'd established, remind him about the metaphorical line of fire down the middle of the bed, protect what remained of her carefully guarded heart. Instead, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, soft questioning, giving him every opportunity to pull away. Chiron made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between surrender and victory, and hauled her against him. This kiss was different from a performance for Davos. Slower, deeper, a conversation without words where they were both asking questions neither was ready to answer. When they finally broke apart, Anya was trembling and Chiron looked thoroughly undone. "For the record," she said against his mouth, "that wasn't for any audience. That was just for me." His laugh was shaky. "You're going to destroy me, aren't you?" "Probably." She traced the line of his jaw, marveling at her own boldness. "If you don't destroy me first." Anya. Her name was a warning and a promise. "We still have 2 months left of this arrangement. 2 months of pretending in public while trying not to..." "Fall?" she finished quietly. "Yes." His forehead dropped to rest against hers. "Except I think it might be too late for that." Her heart did something complicated and terrifying in her chest. The kiss with Davos, was that really just for the act? Chiron's hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. The raw honesty in them stole whatever breath she had remaining. No, he admitted, it was an excuse to do what I've been desperate to do for days. And that terrifies me more than any political threat Lycaos could devise. They stood there, caught between the safety of the lie they constructed and the dangerous truth trying to take root in its place. Outside, the keep continued its daily rhythms. Servants moving through corridors, guards changing shifts, the machinery of court politics grinding forward. Inside this room, two people who'd agreed to 3 months of carefully orchestrated deception were discovering that the heart recognized no such boundaries. And the most terrifying part was how desperately Anya wanted to let herself fall completely. Chapter 7. The Truth is Forced. The Grand Council Hall had been built to host all the clan alphas under one roof, a massive chamber where centuries of alliances had been forged and broken. Today it was filled to capacity. Representatives from every territory gathered for formal recognition of Chiron and Anya's upcoming union. Spring equinox was only a week away, and tradition demanded the assembled clans witness and approve the Western heir's choice of mate. Anya stood beside Chiron on the raised dais, dressed in ceremonial silver that marked her as the future Luna. 3 months had passed since that desperate gamble in a ballroom. 3 months of pretending that had slowly, irrevocably become something terrifyingly real. His hand held hers, their fingers interlaced with the easy intimacy of lovers who'd shared far more than just a bed. She could feel his pulse against her palm, steady and strong, anchoring her against the weight of hundreds of eyes. Alpha King Theron presided from his throne, looking stronger than he had in months. His approval of their match already publicly declared. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Then the main doors crashed open. Alpha King Lycaos strode in with the confidence of someone holding all the cards, flanked by his advisors, and carrying a leather document case that made Anya's blood run cold. "Forgive the interruption," Lycaos announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent hall. "But I cannot in good conscience allow this council to legitimize a union built on deception and fraud." Chiron's hand tightened around hers. "That's a serious accusation, King Lycaos. I trust you have evidence to support slandering my betrothed." "Oh, I have evidence." Lycaos mounted the dais steps with predatory grace. "Evidence that Lady Anya Vashchenko attended the solstice ball for one reason only, to secure an advantageous marriage contract for her younger sister. That she approached multiple potential benefactors that very evening, offering information and access in exchange for financial assistance." Murmurs rippled through the assembled alphas. Anya felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "I have testimony," Lycaos continued, pulling document from his case with theatrical precision, from 3 separate witnesses who spoke with Lady Anya that night. She made no secret of her family's financial desperation or her willingness to negotiate for her sister's future. He turned to face Anya directly. "Isn't that true, my lady?" Every eye in the hall fixed on her. She felt Chiron's tension radiating beside her, felt the careful world they built together crumbling. "I," her voice came out a whisper. "Yes, I was seeking help for my sister." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Lycaos smiled like a wolf scenting blood. "So you admit that when Prince Chiron approached you, a complete stranger, you saw an opportunity. A desperate woman willing to play whatever role necessary to secure the wealth and status you couldn't achieve through legitimate means." "That's enough," Chiron growled. "Is it—" Lycaos turned to Theron. "Your Majesty, the evidence is clear. This was never a genuine attachment. It was a calculated transaction by a manipulative woman who ensnared your son through deception. Prince Chiron was a victim of—" "Victim?" Chiron's voice cracked like a whip, silencing Lycaos mid-sentence. He released Anya's hand, and she felt the loss like a physical blow, felt everything they built shattering around her. This was it, the moment he would claim he'd been deceived, protect himself by throwing her to the wolves. She'd known this ending was possible from the beginning, had agreed to bear the consequences. She just hadn't expected it to hurt this much. Chiron descended from the dais, moving toward Lycaos with lethal intent. "You call me a victim?" You think I'm some naive fool who couldn't recognize exactly what was happening that night? Anya's breath stopped. I knew, Chiron declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. I knew she was desperate, knew she was seeking help for her family, knew she had every reason to view me as an opportunity rather than a romantic prospect. Pain lanced through Anya's chest. This was worse than simple abandonment. This was public humiliation. And I didn't care, Chiron continued, turning back to face her. The raw emotion blazing in his winter-gray eyes made her knees weak. Because in 3 months of the so-called deception, Anya Vashchenko has proven herself more honorable, more intelligent, and more worthy of standing beside me than any carefully vetted political match could ever be. He crossed back to her, climbing the dais steps with the focused intensity of someone who made an irrevocable choice. Yes, we began as a transaction, Chiron said, taking both her hands in his. I offered her terms. She accepted. We entered this arrangement with clear eyes and calculated goals. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. But somewhere between the negotiations and the performances, between sharing quarters and sharing truths we'd never spoken aloud to anyone else. His voice dropped, meant for her alone, but carrying in the absolute silence. I fell in love with you. Completely, irrevocably, in a way that has nothing to do with politics or alliances or 3-month agreements. Tears burned behind Anya's eyes. Chiron, you think she manipulated me? He turned back to Lycaos without releasing her hands. She saved me from a marriage that would have destroyed an innocent girl, from becoming the kind of ruler who puts political expedience above honor, from a life where duty eclipsed every possibility of genuine connection. Chiron's hand moved to cup her face with devastating tenderness. Anya is my mate, not my political arrangement, not my strategic alliance. My true mate, chosen by my heart and my wolf, and I will challenge to single combat any alpha who questions that bond. The declaration hung in the air like thrown lightning. Alpha King Theron rose from his throne, and Anya's heart stuttered. But the Western King's expression held something that might have been satisfaction. King Lycaos, Theron said, do you accept my son's challenge? Lycaos' face had gone ashen. Challenging the Western heir to combat over a mate bond was within his rights. But refusing would mark him as a coward, and accepting meant facing one of the most formidable warriors in the territories. Lycaos looked between Chiron's lethal stance and Anya's tear-streaked face. No, I withdraw my accusations. Then this council recognizes the bond, Theron declared. Prince Chiron and Lady Anya's union will proceed as planned. Anyone who wishes to contest this is welcome to face me personally. The assembled alphas erupted in howls of approval, the traditional acceptance of a mating declaration, but Anya barely heard them. She was too focused on Chiron, on the man who'd just chosen her over political safety, over his careful plans, over everything. You didn't have to, she whispered. Yes, Chiron said fiercely. I absolutely did, because you're mine, Anya Vashchenko, and I'm yours, and that's the only truth that matters anymore. He kissed her then, in front of the assembled clans, with nothing calculated or performed about it, just raw, honest love that had grown in the spaces between their careful lies. When they finally broke apart, breathless and shaking, Anya pressed her forehead to his. Outside, winter was giving way to spring. Inside, two people who'd agreed to 3 months of deception discovered that the truest bonds were often forged in the most unexpected ways. Chapter 8, Resolution, the True Choice. The keep's private gardens were Anya's favorite refuge, a walled sanctuary where ancient roses climbed stone trellises and winter's last snow melted into spring's first blooms. She'd escaped here after the chaos of the council meeting, needing space to process everything that had happened, everything that had changed irrevocably in a single, shattering declaration. I fell in love with you. The words played on repeat in her mind, accompanied by the visceral memory of Chiron's voice carrying across the hall, choosing her in front of everyone who mattered. She heard his footsteps on the gravel path before she saw him, already attuned to a particular rhythm of his movement after 3 months of hyper-awareness. When she turned, he stood at the garden entrance, still dressed in his formal council attire, looking simultaneously triumphant and uncertain. "I thought I might find you here," Chiron said quietly, moving closer but maintaining a careful distance that made her chest ache. "I needed to think." Anya wrapped her arms around herself against the spring chill. That was quite a performance she gave. Something flickered across his expression. Hurt, quickly masked. "It wasn't performance, Anya." Not a single word. "I know." The admission came out softer than she'd intended. "That's what I'm trying to process." Silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken things. Chiron moved to the stone bench beneath the rose arbor, gesturing for her to join him. She did, acutely aware of the space he left between them, close enough to touch, far enough to preserve choice. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, his gaze fixed on the gardens rather than her face. "I brought you into the situation without fully considering the risks. Lycaos could have destroyed you today. Your reputation, your family standing, everything you were trying to protect. But he didn't." Anya turned to study his profile, the sharp angles softened by late afternoon light. "Because you claim me as your true mate in front of the entire council. You understand what that means, don't you? There's no dissolving that bond without catastrophic political and personal consequences." "I understand perfectly." Now he met her eyes, and the intensity there stole her breath. "Which is why I need to give you a choice. A real one, without coercion or desperation forcing your hand." He pulled a familiar leather document case from inside his jacket, setting it on the bench between them like a barrier. "Everything we agreed to. The land grants, your sister's marriage contract, already finalized and legally binding regardless of what happens between us. Your family's honor is restored. Myra's future is secured." His hands clenched into fists. "You're free, Anya. Free to walk away from this arrangement, from me, with everything you came here seeking." Her heart stuttered painfully. "You're releasing me from our agreement?" "I'm giving you the choice I should have given you from the beginning." Chiron's voice had gone rough. "The choice to stay because you want to, not because you're trapped by circumstances or 3-month contracts or public declarations I made without asking your permission first." Anya stared at the document case, at the culmination of everything she'd risked this deception to achieve. 3 months ago, she would have seized it without hesitation, grabbed her sister's security, and run before the fragile lie could shatter and destroy them both. 3 months ago, she hadn't known what it felt like to sleep beside someone who understood her silences, hadn't experienced the peculiar intimacy of watching a ruthless prince become gentle with a desperate young warrior, hadn't fallen catastrophically, irrevocably in love with a man who saw past her family's disgrace to the woman beneath. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. Chiron's laugh held no humor. "What I want is irrelevant. This has to be your choice." "Chiron." She waited until he looked at her. "What do you want?" His control cracked, emotions flooding across his face too quickly to catalog. "I want you to stay. I want to marry you at the spring equinox, not as political theater, but as my true mate. I want to wake up beside you for the rest of my life and argue about books and navigate court politics and build something real together." He dragged a hand through his hair. "But I won't trap you with obligation or guilt. If you want to leave, if you need to leave, I'll ensure you and your family are protected regardless." Anya's vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back since the council hall. "You terrify me." He flinched as if she'd struck him. "Not because you're dangerous," she continued quickly, "though you absolutely are. You terrify me because somewhere between that first negotiation on the balcony and this moment, you became the thing I want most in the world, more than security or status or restored honor." Her voice broke. "You became home. And that's the most frightening thing I've ever experienced." Hope flared in his eyes, fragile and desperate. "Anya." "I came to that ball seeking a transaction," she interrupted, needing to say this before courage failed. "I was so focused on saving my sister, on fixing my family's ruin, that I'd forgotten I might deserve saving too. Deserve being seen as more than damaged goods from a disgraced bloodline." She picked up the document case, felt the weight of her original goals, and set it aside deliberately. "I don't want to leave. I don't want the freedom to walk away from the most genuine connection I've ever experienced. Anya turned to face him fully, letting every carefully constructed defense crumble. I want to stay because my heart chose you weeks ago, and no amount of logical self-preservation can change that. I want to be your mate, not your political arrangement, not your 3-month deception, but your true partner in every way that matters. The distance between them evaporated as Chiron hauled her against him, one hand cradling her face while the other wrapped around her waist with the fierce possession of someone who'd been terrified of losing something precious. "Say it again," he demanded against her mouth. "I love you." The words came easier this time, like breaking open a dam. "I love your ruthless political mind and your unexpected kindness, and the way you fight for people who can't fight for themselves. I love that you gave me a choice even when it clearly killed you. I love—" He kissed her, swallowing the rest of her confession, pouring everything he felt into the connection between them. This wasn't performance or improvisation or desperate distraction. This was two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, choosing partnership over safety, love over logic. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Chiron pressed his forehead to hers. "The spring equinox," he said. "A real wedding. Our wedding." "Yes." Anya's smile felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Though technically, we've already been living as mates for 3 months. We're just making it official." His laugh rumbled through his chest into hers. "My father is going to claim he orchestrated this entire thing. Didn't he?" She pulled back enough to see his face. "Demanding we share quarters, forcing intimacy that allowed real connection to develop? Theron Valerius, master strategist even from a sickbed." Chiron traced the curve of her jaw with reverent fingers. "I'll never admit he was right. It would be insufferable. Your secret is safe with me." Anya captured his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. "Among all the other secrets we've kept. No more secrets." His expression turned serious. "No more deceptions or careful performances. Just us, building something real." "Just us," she agreed. They sat in the garden as afternoon faded toward evening, wrapped in each other and the fragile new truth they'd built from calculated lies. Around them, spring continued its inexorable transformation, winter's death giving way to new growth, ice melting into possibility. Inside the keep, preparations would soon begin for a wedding that would unite the Western clan's heir with an Eastern lady of restored honor. Political alliances would be celebrated, strategic advantages analyzed. Courtiers would whisper about the romantic story of a prince who'd chosen love over expedience. But here, in the privacy of ancient roses and fading light, it was simpler. Two people who'd agreed to 3 months of pretense, discovering that the greatest love stories often begin with the most desperate gambles. Two hearts that had found each other across a crowded ballroom, in whispered negotiations and shared quarters, in public performances that slowly became private truth. "I have one condition," Anya said suddenly. Chiron tensed. "What?" "When we tell our children this story someday, and we will tell them, because it's too ridiculous not to, we're calling it what it actually was. Which is," she smiled against his shoulder, "the most calculated romantic gesture in Western clan history. You literally negotiated your way into my heart." His laugh echoed across the garden, startling birds from their roosts. "I can live with that version." "Good." Anya tilted her face up for another kiss. "Because I intend to remind you of it frequently, usually when you're being impossibly arrogant about something." "I'm never arrogant," Chiron protested, then kissed her thoroughly enough to prove otherwise. Spring came fully to Valerius Keep that year, marked by celebrations and ceremonies, by political maneuvering and strategic alliances. But for the Western heir and his Eastern mate, it was simply the beginning. The first chapter of a love story that started with whispered commands and fake engagements, and ended with the most genuine truth either of them had ever spoken. "I choose you. Every day, in every way that matters. I choose you." And in choosing each other, they discovered that sometimes the most authentic bonds are forged in deception's fire, tested by political storms, and proven unbreakable by the simple act of showing up, honest, vulnerable, and willing to risk everything for a connection that transcends calculation. The spring equinox wedding was magnificent, but the real ceremony had happened months earlier, in a ballroom where a desperate prince had whispered for words that changed everything. Pretend you're my fiancée. The pretense had ended. The love remained. And that was the only truth that mattered. The end.